Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Today I have 7 brand new, scary, true stories from the Appalachian Trail that will freak you out. These aren't just camping stories. Real people met something evil in the woods and almost didn't make it home. After you hear these, you'll never want to walk in the woods alone again. But first, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. All right, let's jump into these creepy stories. I guess it started the year I turned 31 when I finally saved enough money to attempt the whole Appalachian Trail. My name's Janet, and I teach middle school back in Michigan. Kids gave me the trail name School's Out. 3 years of planning, every spare dollar going into gear, using my summer break to chase this dream of hiking all 2,190 miles. Everything had been perfect. My pace was steady, my gear was dialed in, and I was right on schedule to hit Pine Grove Furnace State Park for the traditional halfway celebration. See, Pine Grove sits on land that's seen more than its share of darkness. The old furnace there used to smelt iron ore back in the 1700s, and before that, the Susquehannock people called this area Conewago, the place where nothing grows right. Local families have stories going back generations about strange happenings in these woods. Springs that run backwards, compasses spinning wild, folks disappearing on clear days. My great-grandfather worked the furnace in the 1940s and used to tell stories about water that didn't know which way was down. I thought they were just old mountain tales. Looking back now, I should have listened. The morning I reached Pine Grove, I was running low on water. My last reliable source had been 8 miles back, but I'd pushed through because my map showed a spring near Fuller Lake, just off the main trail. The blue blazes were clear enough, winding through thick Pennsylvania forest toward what should have been a simple water stop. I'd followed dozens of similar side trails without incident. But when I found the spring, every instinct I had screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. The water was flowing uphill, not just pooling or backing up, actively flowing against gravity, moving steadily up over rocks and fallen logs, collecting in a pool at higher elevation than where it started. The stream was maybe 2 feet wide, crystal clear, and it was defying every law of physics I'd ever learned. I stood there for 10 minutes, rubbing my eyes, walking away and coming back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. 3 other hikers were already there when I arrived. 2 section hikers who looked like they'd been there for days, and a woman about my age whose pack showed serious trail wear. All of them just standing there, staring at the impossible water like it might suddenly start flowing correctly again. "How long?" I finally managed. One of the guys looked up with hollow, exhausted eyes. 3 days. Started 3 days ago. We've been watching it. Have any of you contacted? Don't. The woman's voice was sharp, desperate. Don't ask questions. Don't take pictures. Don't call anyone. Just decide if you're drinking it or not, because that's the only choice that matters now. I was nearly out of water, maybe half a cup between both bottles. The next reliable source was 12 miles north, and it was already getting hot. In July Pennsylvania heat, that wasn't survivable. I stared at the upward flowing spring, knowing I had no real choice. The water looked clean, smelled like any mountain spring. But when I filled my bottles from that impossible stream, it tasted wrong, metallic, electric, like licking a battery while chewing copper pennies. Within minutes of drinking it, my entire relationship with gravity began to change. At first, I just felt lighter. My 35-pound pack seemed to weigh nothing. My steps felt bouncy, springy, like walking on a trampoline. I thought it was just relief from proper hydration. Then I tried to take a normal step forward and launched myself 10 feet down the trail. I had to grab a tree to keep from bouncing off into the forest. Every step carried me impossibly far, like I was walking on the moon. When I looked back, the other hikers were moving the same way, bouncing, floating, grabbing onto anything solid to control their movement. The guy who'd been there 3 days was completely airborne now, floating 6 feet off the ground, white-knuckling a tree branch. His feet dangled helplessly below him, like he was suspended by invisible wires. "You have to concentrate," he called down, his voice strained with constant effort. "Focus on staying down, but it gets harder. Every hour, every day, it gets so much harder. I spent the next hour relearning how to walk. Small steps, conscious downward pressure with each foot, using my trekking poles like anchors. But even fighting it with everything I had, I still covered ground faster than ever before. By evening, my GPS showed 47 miles, impossible distance for a day hike. That's when I noticed the sun moving backwards across the sky. I'd started hiking north around 10 a.m. When I reached what should have been my evening campsite, my phone showed 7 p.m., but the sun was rising in the east like it was morning again. According to my GPS coordinates and photo timestamps, I'd somehow arrived at my destination before I'd left that morning. Time itself was flowing uphill. That first night, I tied myself to a tree with my guy lines. Without constant mental effort, my body wanted to drift upward like smoke. I'd doze off and wake up floating at rope's length, 6 feet above my sleeping bag, panic shooting through me as I clawed my way back down. Other hikers drifted past my campsite all night, people who'd given up fighting the effect. They moved through the forest like ghosts, feet never touching ground, reaching desperately for branches that were always just out of grasp. Some called out for help, but their voices faded as they rose above the canopy. The worst part was what was happening inside my body. My organs felt like they were shifting upward, reorganizing themselves for a world where down was up. My heart hammered somewhere near my throat. My stomach pressed against my ribs. Everything internal was trying to reverse itself, and I could feel the change happening cell by cell. Over the next few days, I discovered every water source north of Pine Grove was flowing the same impossible direction. Every spring, every stream, every creek, all contaminated with whatever was rewriting the laws of physics in this place. I had no choice but to keep drinking it. The alternative was death by dehydration. Some hikers stopped fighting entirely. I watched a woman from Georgia let go of the tree she'd been clinging to and drift upward, first above the tree line, then into open sky. She grew smaller and smaller until she was just a speck against the blue, still rising. On clear days, if I looked up, I could see dozens of tiny figures ascending like dark stars, miles above the earth. They're still conscious up there, the 3-day hiker told me before he finally let go too. I can hear them sometimes, calling down. They say it's peaceful, no more fighting, no more concentrating every second just to stay connected to the ground. It's been 3 weeks since Pine Grove Furnace, and the effect is spreading like a slow poison through the mountains. More springs reverse every day, flowing upward towards some destination I can't fathom. The trail corridor itself is changing, gravity breaking down mile by mile, reality inverting in ways that make my teeth ache. I'm riding this tied to the floor of a trail shelter, feeling that constant upward pull trying to lift me toward the ceiling. My ribs are starting to separate from the pressure of my organs pressing upward. My vision blurs sometimes when my eyes try to float up into my skull. The other hikers here are in the same condition. We're all tethered down like helium balloons, fighting a force that grows stronger every hour. The psychological toll is almost worse than the physical. I have to concentrate every waking moment just to stay grounded. Sleep is impossible without restraint. Till I catch myself staring upward, wondering what's really up there in that endless blue above the trees. The people who've let themselves float away. Sometimes I think they had the right idea. What terrifies me most is that I'm starting to understand why this is happening here, in this specific place. The old Susquehannock stories talk about Conewago as a place where the earth itself was wounded, where the boundary between worlds grew thin. The iron furnace dug deep into that wounded ground for over 2 centuries, pulling ore from depths that maybe should have stayed untouched. My great-grandfather's stories weren't just mountain folklore. They were warnings about what lives in the deep places, what gets disturbed when you dig too far into cursed earth. The upward flowing water isn't just defying gravity. It's returning to somewhere else, carrying pieces of our world back with it. And we're those pieces. I can feel myself becoming less connected to this reality with every passing hour. My thoughts sometimes drift upward before my body does. I'll lose minutes staring at the sky, feeling a pull that isn't just physical anymore. It's spiritual, psychological, like something vast and patient is calling me home to a place I've never been. The worst part? Part of me wants to answer that call. If you're planning to hike the AT through Pennsylvania, especially anywhere near Pine Grove Furnace, don't go alone. Don't drink from any water source that looks even slightly wrong. And if you see water flowing uphill, run. Don't investigate, don't take pictures, don't try to understand it. Just run as far and as fast as you can, because once you drink from an upward spring, you'll never fully belong to the ground again. I'm losing the fight. The rope around my waist is the only thing keeping me from joining the others in their endless ascent. But the pull is getting stronger and my concentration is breaking down. Soon I'll have to choose. Spend whatever's left of my life tied down like an animal, or let go and discover what's waiting for us in that vast blue emptiness above the world. Looking up at those rising figures still climbing towards something I can't see, I'm starting to think they might be the lucky ones. The water knows where it's going. Maybe it's time I trusted it to take me there too. I was 25 when I finally did it. Completed my through hike of the Appalachian Trail. Took me 6 months, starting in Georgia back in March and finishing up at Mount Katahdin on October 2nd. I had that summit photo and everything, grinning like an idiot with my ratty old pack and hiking poles. My trail name was Circuit, on account of me working IT support before I left, and honestly, I was pretty proud of myself. Most people don't make it all the way through. I'd been back home in my little apartment in Asheville for about a week, still trying to readjust to having walls and a real bed again. The thing about through hiking is that it changes you. Not in some deep spiritual way like people make it out to be, but in practical ways. You wake up at dawn without an alarm. You start calculating distances in your head constantly. You notice every white rectangle painted on trees, even in the city. The trail becomes part of how your brain works, if that makes sense. So when I first saw the blaze on my bedroom wall, I thought maybe I was just seeing things wrong. It was a Tuesday morning, maybe 6 a.m., when I woke up and there it was. A perfect white rectangle painted on the wall next to my dresser. Same dimensions as an AT blaze, about 2 inches by 6 inches, crisp edges. The paint was still wet. I could smell it. I got up and touched it, and white paint came off on my finger. I stood there for a good 5 minutes trying to figure out how that was even possible. My landlord didn't have a key that I knew of, and I sure as hell didn't paint it myself, but there it was, real as anything. I figured maybe I was losing it a little. Trail brain, you know? 6 months of following white blazes through the woods. Maybe I was having some kind of weird adjustment reaction. I took a picture of it with my phone and went to make coffee, trying to convince myself I'd painted it somehow and just forgot. Except I didn't own any white paint. The next morning there were 3 more. One on the kitchen wall near the sink, one in the hallway leading to the bathroom, and another one right on the bathroom doorframe. They formed a perfect trail through my apartment, just like the blazes on the AT that guide you from point A to point B. Each one was still wet when I found them, that sharp paint smell hanging in the air. My hands were shaking a little as I followed them, and honestly, I felt stupid doing it, but I had to see where they led. The trail ended at my bathroom mirror. But when I looked into it, I didn't see my bathroom. I saw forest. Deep green woods with that filtered sunlight you get under a heavy canopy, and I could swear I heard birds chirping. Not loud, just that background noise you get used to on the trail. I reached out to touch the mirror, and my reflection moved with me. But behind my reflection was definitely forest floor covered in leaves. I blinked hard and shook my head, and when I looked again, it was just my regular bathroom mirror. But I noticed something else. My pedometer. I'd clipped it to my pajama pants out of habit, and it read 0.3 miles. I'd walked 0.3 of a mile inside my 800-square-foot apartment. That's impossible. Even if I'd been pacing around all morning, which I hadn't, there's no way to walk that distance in such a small space. The blazes kept appearing. Every morning, new ones. They started showing up outside too, on the oak tree in front of my building, on telephone poles down the street, on the side of the corner store, always forming a trail, always leading somewhere. and I started following them. Not on purpose at first, but I'd be walking to my car and I'd see a blaze and just follow it. Like my body remembered what to do before my brain caught up. I tried looking it up online, figured maybe I wasn't the only one going crazy. Turns out I wasn't. Found a forum thread where 3 other people were talking about the same thing. All through hike completers. All having blazes appear in their homes. One guy in Vermont, another in North Carolina, and a woman in Tennessee. None of us could explain it, but we all had the same thing happening. White rectangles showing up overnight, always wet, always forming trails. The worst part was the compulsion. I'd wake up and immediately start getting ready for a day hike. Not thinking about it, just doing it. I'd be reaching for my pack before I remembered I was supposed to go to work. My body was still on trail time, still following the routine I'd built up over 6 months. Wake up, pack up, hit the trail, make miles. Except now the trail was in my apartment. That's when I found my pack in the closet. I'd stored it in my parents' garage when I got back. Hadn't touched it since. But there it was, fully loaded with all my gear. Not just the stuff I remembered packing when I got home, but food I'd eaten months ago. That bag of trail mix from Harper's Ferry. The ramen I'd finished back in Pennsylvania. Even my water bottles were full and cold, like I'd just filled them from a mountain stream. My fitness tracker was going insane. According to it, I'd hiked 47 miles without leaving my apartment complex. My legs felt it too, that deep ache you get after a long day on the trail. Blisters were reforming on my feet in the exact same spots where I'd had them during the hike. My left shoulder was sore where my pack strap had rubbed for toothy 100 miles. I was living the trail all over again, but compressed into my daily life. Then my spare bedroom became a shelter. I woke up one morning and opened that door, and it wasn't my spare room anymore. It was an AT shelter. 3 walls, open front, wooden sleeping platform, even the little mouse that every shelter seems to have. There was a register on the table, and when I flipped through it, I saw entries from other hikers. Fresh entries, dated that morning. People signing in like they'd just arrived. The weird thing was, I recognized some of the names. They were the other people from the forum. Circuit here, Vermont guy, still following blazes at home. And below that, Compass Rose. Same here. This is my kitchen somehow. We were all sharing the same impossible space, all hiking the same trail that existed in our separate homes, but also together. I tried calling the number the Vermont guy had posted, but when he answered, I could hear my own voice echoing in the background, like he was in my spare room while also being in his own house. The weather started getting weird after that. It rained in my apartment one night, actually rained with drops coming through my ceiling that definitely wasn't leaking before. I had to hang my bear bag in the living room, just like I'd done every night on the trail. The walls started growing bark, not fake bark, real tree bark, rough and smelling like the forest. Ferns pushed up through gaps in my hardwood floors. My old trail injuries were coming back too. That knee that bothered me through Virginia was aching again. The blister on my right heel that took weeks to heal was there again, fresh and painful. I could feel every mile of the AT in my body all over again, compressed and relived every single day. I couldn't go to work anymore. I tried, but I'd start following the blazes and end up hiking instead of driving to the office. My boss called, then texted, then stopped trying to reach me. I got the termination paperwork in the mail, but the thing is, I was technically present. I was hiking, making miles, following the trail. It just happened to be the same trail that went through my apartment and somehow covered the entire Appalachian Trail at the same time. The apartment kept changing. Walls became trees. My kitchen table became a picnic table at a trail shelter. My bed became a sleeping bag on a wooden platform, boat. And I was still in my 800 square foot space, still paying rent, still getting mail delivered. I'd walk from my bedroom to my bathroom and somehow pass through Shenandoah, the Smokies, the White Mountains. The distance was always wrong. My pedometer showed hundreds of miles some days, but I never left my building. Looking back now, I think the trail wasn't done with me. Or maybe I wasn't done with it. You spend 6 months learning to follow blazes, to trust them completely, to let them guide every step you take. Maybe that kind of training doesn't just turn off when you reach Katahdin. Maybe it becomes part of who you are. I still live in that apartment. Been 3 years now. The blazes are still there, still appearing every few days, still leading through rooms that are also mountains, also forest, also the trail I completed but never really finished. My rent gets paid automatically from my bank account. I had some savings from before the hike. And my mail still comes. But I'm hiking the AT every day, following those white rectangles through 2,100 miles of trail that fits perfectly inside 800 square feet. The other hikers are still there too, in the shelters that appear in my spare room and bathroom and sometimes my kitchen. We nod to each other, sign the registers, share trail stories. All of us still hiking, still making miles, still following the blazes home. You never really leave the trail, I guess. Complete it once, and you're hiking it forever, even at home. The blazes make sure of that. They know the way. And once you learn to follow them, you don't really have a choice. You just keep walking, one white rectangle at a time, for as long as they keep appearing. And they always keep appearing. I was 27 when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, working as a pharmacy tech back in Ohio. My trail name was Buckeye, and I was doing a solo northbound through hike. Day 42 found me trudging toward Overmountain Shelter in Tennessee, just as the sun was setting behind the ridgeline. I'd been looking forward to that shelter all day. My feet were killing me, and I needed to get off the trail before full dark. The thing is, I'd heard it could get crowded during peak season, but I figured I'd find space somewhere. What I didn't expect was to find 12 other hikers already there, all sitting around the shelter like they were waiting for me, and every single one of them had my exact face. At first, I thought it was just one of those weird coincidences. You know how sometimes you see someone who looks like your brother or whatever? Maybe these were siblings or cousins who all had similar features. But then they all turned toward me at the same time, and I could see it wasn't just similar features. It was my face, my exact face, down to the small scar through my left eyebrow that I got when I was 8 years old, falling off my bike. They were all different heights, different weights. Some were women, some were men, different hair colors, different builds. But every single face was mine. Same nose, same eyes, same mouth. Even the same expressions I recognized from looking in mirrors my whole life. Buckeye, one of them said, and I felt my stomach drop. That was my trail name, but I hadn't told anyone at this shelter yet. Jamie, said another one. That's my real name. Jay Bear, said a third, and that made my blood run cold. That was what my dad called me when I was little. Only my family knew that nickname. They all started talking at once then, saying things only I should know. About the time I broke my arm in 5th grade. About my first job at the movie theater. About the girl I dated in college who collected vintage postcards. Memories that were mine, that I'd never shared with strangers on the trail. I dropped my pack and just stared at them. What the hell is going on? The closest one, who looked like me but was taller, more muscular, stood up and walked over. You don't remember, do you? This is where we all meet up, where all the versions of us come together. Versions? I'm you from 2018, he said. Started my through hike that year instead of 2025. And she's you from 2022, going southbound. He pointed to one of the women. And he's you if you'd never quit that job at the warehouse, started hiking when you were 35 instead. I looked around at all of them, and they were nodding like this made perfect sense, each one claiming to be me, but from different decision points in my life, different paths I could have taken, different years I could have started hiking, different trails I could have chosen. We all remember the same childhood, said another version of me, this one shorter and stockier. Same parents, same house, same everything up until we turned 18. Then we made different choices, and our lives went different ways. But Overmountain Shelter is where all the paths cross. I felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. But they knew things. Private things. Things I'd never told anyone. Check the register, one of them said, pointing to the logbook that every hiker signs. I flipped through it with shaking hands, and my heart nearly stopped. Page after page of entries, all in different handwriting, but all signed with my name. Different dates going back years, but always the same experience. Arrived at shelter, found other versions of myself, realized this is where all possible timelines converge. That's when I noticed something else. When I got close to any of them, my hand started looking transparent, like I wasn't completely it anymore. "It's starting," said the oldest-looking version of me, who claimed to be from 2010. "The boundaries between us are getting thin. Only one version can leave this place. The others become what we call trail echoes." "What do you mean?" "Whoever exits the shelter first becomes the real version, the one who gets to continue existing. The rest of us fade away, become part of the trail itself." I felt a pulling sensation toward the nearest version of myself, like magnets attracting. My body was trying to merge with his, and I had to fight to stay separate. It was the most wrong thing I'd ever felt. "We've been waiting for you," said another me. "The 2025 version. You're the newest, which means you're the strongest right now. But that won't last long." I started backing toward the edge of the shelter platform. All of them were standing now, moving toward me slowly. As they got closer, I could feel my memories mixing with theirs. I remembered hiking in 2018, even though I knew I'd never done that. I remembered going southbound, even though I'd been heading north. I remembered quitting jobs I'd never had, dating people I'd never met. "Don't fight it," one of them said. "It's easier if you just let it happen." But I couldn't. The pulling sensation was getting stronger, and when two of the other versions accidentally touched each other, they started melting together, screaming as their bodies fused into something that wasn't quite right. Something that looked like me but wrong, with features that didn't line up properly. The rest of them started forming a human chain, trying to grab me and pull me in. I could hear my own voice calling from every direction, all the different versions of me trying to absorb my timeline. I jumped off the shelter platform and ran into the darkness, not caring about bears or cliffs or anything else. Behind me, I could hear myself calling, 12 different versions of my voice, all begging me to come back, to join them, to stop fighting what was supposed to happen. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until I couldn't hear the voices anymore. Then I kept running until I found another campsite miles away, where I spent the night shivering in my sleeping bag, afraid to close my eyes. When I went back to Overmountain Shelter the next morning, it was empty. No sign that anyone had been there. But the register still had all those entries, all those different versions of my handwriting, all those dates going back years. The problem is, I now have memories of all those different hikes. I remember starting in 2018, 2019, 2020, every year up to 2025. I remember going both northbound and southbound. I remember hiking with different gear, in different weather, meeting different people. All of those memories feel equally real, and I keep meeting myself on the trail. Different versions, just for a moment, always at shelters or trail junctions. Sometimes I'm taller, sometimes shorter, sometimes I'm a different age. But it's always me, and I never know which version is the real one anymore. I finished the trail, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the version of me who started it. Looking back now, I still don't know if I won that night at Overmountain Shelter or if one of the other versions did, and I just have his memories now. I check the register whenever I pass that shelter, and there are always new entries. Always my name, always the same story. I don't hike alone anymore. I was 22 when I got stuck at Lehigh Gap, and the worst part isn't that I lost 3 months of my life up there. The worst part is that I can still feel it calling me back. My name's Marcus, but everyone on the trail called me Semester because I was section hiking Pennsylvania every weekend while finishing my senior year at Temple. I'd drive up from Philly Friday nights, hit a different piece of the Appalachian Trail, then drag myself back to campus Sunday evening for Monday classes. The mountains were the only place my head felt clear. My dad had died the year before, lung cancer from 30 years in the steel mills, and hiking was how I processed losing him without falling apart completely. I'd been working through Pennsylvania methodically for almost 2 years by October 2019. Some sections were easy walks through farmland. Others were brutal climbs that left me hobbling back to my dorm. But they all followed the same reliable pattern. Start at point A, walk to point B, drive home. Simple. Predictable. Safe. Lehigh Gap was supposed to be section number 47 out of 51. Just another weekend, just another box to check off. The gap sits where the Appalachian Trail crosses Highway 248, and if you've never seen it, it looks like the surface of Mars. The entire south face of the mountain is this barren wasteland of pale gray rock where nothing grows. Zinc contamination from old mining operations killed everything decades ago, and it never came back. No trees, no grass, no weeds, just naked stone stretching straight up about 1,000 feet to the ridge. I parked at the trailhead that Saturday morning in late October, shouldered my overnight pack, and studied what I was about to climb. The trail doesn't switch back up Lehigh Gap. It goes straight up the rock face like a ladder made of stone. You use your hands as much as your feet, and every hiker I'd talked to described it as the most brutal climb in Pennsylvania. But I was young and strong and carrying my father's old compass in my pocket for luck. 2 hours of hard climbing seemed manageable. I marked my GPS coordinates at the base, 40.8347 Degen, 75.73775 Dig WW. Then I started up. The first hour went exactly like I'd expected. My legs burned, my lungs worked overtime, and the sharp granite scraped my palms raw. But I was making steady progress. I could see other hikers below me starting their own climbs, a couple Nobo through hikers with trail names stitched on their packs, a day hiker with a small blue backpack. Around the 90-minute mark, I was getting close to the top. I could see the ridgeline maybe 20 minutes above me, could make out the white blazes marking where the trail continued north. My water was running low and my shoulders ached from the steep angle, but I felt good about my pace. I grabbed what looked like the final handhold, a solid piece of granite about the size of a dinner plate, pulled myself up onto level ground, took 3 steps toward what I could see was definitely the continuation of the trail, and I was at the bottom again, not falling, not sliding, just suddenly, impossibly, standing at the exact coordinates where I'd started with my pack still strapped to my shoulders and my water bottle in my hand. Like someone had hit a reset button. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. I checked my GPS, 40.8347 DGN, 75.7375 DGW. The same numbers. I looked up at the rock face and I could see my own boot prints in the thin dirt between stones, tracking my route up the first 100 feet. The logical explanations came first. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, some kind of altitude-induced hallucination. I drank water, ate an energy bar, checked my gear. Everything seemed normal. My hands were still scraped from climbing. My muscles were still tired, but somehow I was back where I'd started. I began climbing again. This time I paid obsessive attention to my route, mentally cataloging specific rocks and handholds. A chunk of quartz, shaped like a triangle. A crack that ran horizontal for about 3 feet. A boulder that rocked slightly when I put my weight on it. I climbed slower, more methodically, marking my progress against these landmarks. 2 hours later, I reached the top again. I could see the trail continuing north toward the next ridge. I could see a parking area far below where other hikers were just arriving. I stepped onto the northern continuation of the trail, felt solid ground under my boots, and reset. Same spot, same coordinates. That's when the fear started. I tried a 3rd time, then a 4th. Always the same result. I'd climb for hours, reach an undeniably real summit, take a step toward continuing north, and instantly find myself back at 40.8347 degrees N, 75.7375 degrees W. But here's what really broke my brain. Other people were crossing fine. During my 4th attempt, I followed a northbound through hiker up the mountain, staying maybe 50 feet behind him. I watched him reach the exact same spot where I kept resetting. Watched him wave at some friends who were waiting for him on the other side. Watched him disappear over the ridge. Then I stepped onto the same rocks he'd used, put my feet in his boot prints, reached for the same handholds, and reset to the bottom. The sun was starting to set, and I had a choice to make. I could hike back to my car, drive to Philadelphia, and pretend this had never happened. Or I could stay and try to understand what was happening to me. Something about leaving felt impossible. Not dangerous. Impossible. Like trying to walk through a wall. I set up my tent in a small flat area near the trailhead and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of rocks scraping against rocks, metal jingling, boots finding purchase on stone. Someone was climbing in the darkness. I unzipped my tent and looked up at the mountain face. A faint light was moving up the rocks. A head, lamp maybe, or an old-fashioned flashlight. I could hear heavy breathing, the occasional grunt of effort, gear rattling with each movement. The light reached what should have been the top, hung there for a moment, then simply vanished. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps walking past my tent in the darkness. I lay awake the rest of the night, listening to the sounds of multiple people climbing. Sometimes the footsteps would approach my tent, circle it once, then move away. Sometimes I'd hear voices, quiet conversations in accents I couldn't place, words in languages I didn't recognize. In the morning, I found dozens of boot prints in the dirt around my tent. Different sizes, different tread patterns. Some looked fresh. Others were weathered and deep, like they'd been pressed into the ground years ago but somehow hadn't eroded. That's when I started looking more carefully at the rocks near the base of the mountain, and I found the messages. They were carved small and easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. Day 12 still here, scratched into a granite boulder. Can't leave, gouged into the rock face. Mom, I'm sorry, etched tiny and desperate near the trailhead marker. Most of them had dates: 1987, 1993, 2003, 2009, 2019. Some had initials: JH, MK, Sarah. A few had trail names: Footloose, Wanderer, Stumbles. I spent that entire second day documenting every message I could find. 47 different sets of markings spanning back to 1961. The earliest was just coordinates and a date: 40.8347N, 75.7375 W, August 15th, 1961. Can't get across. God help me. 47 people who had gotten stuck at Lehigh Gap the same way I was stuck. But they weren't all hikers. Some of the messages mentioned mining work. Others talked about hunting or fishing. A few were from people who seemed to live in the area. What they all had in common was trying to cross from south to north at this specific coordinate and finding themselves unable to leave. Day 3, I climbed again. And again on day 4. Each time I reset to the bottom, but something was changing. The climb was getting easier. My body was adapting. My legs were stronger. My lungs more efficient. My hands developing calluses in exactly the right places. It was like I was being optimized, turned into the perfect climbing machine. By the end of the first week, I could make the climb in under an hour. By day 10, I could do it in 40 minutes. But I still couldn't cross. More disturbing was what was happening to my mind. Small details started slipping away first. What day of the week it was, whether I'd eaten breakfast, the names of my college roommates. Then bigger things. Why I'd come to Lehigh Gap in the first place. What I was studying in school. What my father's voice had sounded like. Day 12, I tried to call my mom from the base of the mountain, but my phone showed no signal. When I hiked half a mile south to where I'd had signal the week before, the call went straight through. Marcus? Jesus, where have you been? I've been calling for days. I'm at Lehigh Gap. Mom, something's wrong here. I can't... The line went dead. When I tried to call back, my phone showed no service again, even though I was standing in the same spot. I hiked back to the gap, and that's when I first saw one of the others. She was climbing about 100 feet to my left, moving with the same fluid efficiency I'd developed, but she was translucent, gray, like an old photograph come to life. She wore hiking boots from the 1980s and carried an external frame pack that nobody had used in decades. She never looked at me directly, but I could tell she knew I was there. We climbed in parallel, reached the top at almost the same time, and reset together. But each time we reset, she was a little more transparent, and I realized with growing horror that I was too. I could see through my own hands by day 15. Day 20, There were more of them. A man in canvas work pants and suspenders, PR, probably one of the old miners. A teenage kid in blue jeans and sneakers that looked like they were from the 1960s. A woman with a day pack who kept checking a compass that couldn't possibly work in whatever space we were trapped in. They climbed with me, reset with me, and gradually we were all becoming part of the same eternal loop. But the longer I was there, the more I could sense what was really happening. The mountain was feeding. Not on our bodies, on our repetition. Every climb, every reset was like a heartbeat, pumping energy into something vast and patient that lived in the space between the rock face and the sky. It was old, older than the mining, older than the European settlers. It had been there when the first humans crossed these mountains, and it had learned to trap them in cycles of endless motion. It wanted specific people. I still don't understand the selection criteria. And it would keep them climbing forever, using their repetitive motion to power itself while slowly absorbing their identities. Eventually, we'd become part of the mountain permanently. Translucent figures still climbing, still resetting, still feeding the thing with our endless attempts to cross. Day 25, I could see through my own chest. Day 30, I realized I couldn't remember my last name. Day 35, I forgot what city I was from. But something else was happening too. The longer I climbed, the more I could sense the mountain's thoughts. It was vast and alien, but there were patterns to how it worked, vulnerabilities. It could only hold people who were trying to cross from south to north at those specific coordinates. If you approached from a different angle, if you came down from the north instead of climbing up from the south, it couldn't trap you. Day 42, instead of climbing, I hiked east along the base of the mountain until I found an old mining road that backed up the northern slope. It was overgrown and barely passable, but it led to the ridge about a quarter-mile east of where the Appalachian Trail crossed. I climbed that route. I was 26, working as a bartender in Boston, when I decided to hike the Appalachian Trail southbound and somehow walked straight into tomorrow. People call me whiskey on the trail. Not because I drink a lot, but because I mixed a mean old-fashioned back at Murphy's Pub. I'd saved up for 2 years to do a Sobo through hike, starting from Mount Katahdin on July 1st. Most people go north, but I liked the idea of hiking against the crowd. Made good time those first 2 weeks, averaging about 15 miles a day through Maine and New Hampshire. The weather was perfect, my pack felt light, and I was actually ahead of schedule by the time I reached the Smokies. I still remember that morning at Klingman's Dome like it was yesterday, even though I'm honestly not sure which yesterday it was anymore. The highest point on the entire Appalachian Trail sits at 6,643 feet, and when I woke up in my tent that July morning, everything was wrapped in the thickest fog I'd ever seen. Couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. The air was so heavy it felt like breathing through wet cotton, and the silence was complete. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just my footsteps on the trail and the soft drip of moisture from the trees. I followed the white blazes carefully, checking my phone every few minutes to make sure I was still on track. The GPS kept jumping around, showing me in slightly different spots every time I looked, but that's pretty normal in dense forest. What wasn't normal was how the blazes seemed to shift positions. I'd see one on a tree to my right, check my phone, then look up to find it was now on my left. Figured the fog was just playing tricks on me. The concrete observation tower rose out of the mist like some kind of ancient monument. 54 feet of spiral ramp leading up through the gray nothingness. I'd been looking forward to the views from up there, but with this fog, I knew I'd be lucky to see my own hands. Still, I'd come this far. Might as well climb it. The ramp spiraled up through the thick air, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. About halfway up, I started feeling weird. Dizzy, like the air pressure was changing. My ears popped twice. When I finally reached the observation deck at the top, I broke through the fog layer completely. The sun was shining. Clear blue skies stretched in every direction. But the landscape below me was wrong. I'm talking completely wrong. The mountains I could see through breaks in the fog weren't the ones that should have been there. The peaks were different shapes, different heights. There was a lake to the north that definitely hadn't been on any of my maps, and the forest below looked older somehow, more ancient. trees that seemed too big, too dark. That's when I heard voices and saw 3 hikers coming up the ramp behind me. Nobos, heading north. But their gear was strange. Backpacks I didn't recognize. Hiking poles that looked too light, too advanced. One woman had a phone that was completely flat, like a sheet of black glass. No buttons, no camera bump. Nothing I'd ever seen before. "Beautiful morning," the woman said. "Finally broke through that fog layer." I nodded, still staring at the impossible landscape. "Yeah, it's different than I expected." "First time up here?" asked one of the men. He pulled out his weird phone and showed me the screen. "July 15th, 2025. Perfect day for it." I laughed. "Your phone's wrong, man. It's July 14th, 2024. The 3 of them looked at each other with these strange expressions. The woman held up her phone next to mine. Mine showed July 14th, 2024, clear as day. Hers showed July 15th, 2025. "That's impossible," I said. "Check the news," she suggested, swiping across her phone screen in ways that didn't make sense. "Yesterday was a big day, President Martinez signed that climate bill we've all been waiting for." I'd never heard of any President Martinez. The news stories on her phone showed things that hadn't happened yet. Technologies I didn't recognize. Cities I'd never seen. Events that made no sense. "The tower," said the older man quietly. "It extends through the temporal layer when the fog's this thick. The top exists one day in the future, sometimes more." I thought they were messing with me. Had to be some kind of elaborate prank. But when I looked at my phone again, those news stories were starting to show up on my feeds too. Slowly, like they were loading from somewhere far away. When the fog finally cleared below us, I rushed down the ramp, desperate to get back to normal ground. But everything on the trail was slightly different. The blazes had moved. A shelter I'd passed the day before was gone, replaced by a newer one about a quarter-mile south. The trail register was in a completely different spot. I found the register and flipped through it, looking for familiar names. Found my own entry from the day before, but in handwriting that looked shakier than mine. Still looking for the right today, whiskey. I didn't remember writing that. Panicking now, I hiked back to the tower. The fog was rolling in again, thick and heavy. I climbed the spiral ramp, and when I broke through at the top, I was looking at July 18th, 2025. 3 days in the future. The hiker coming up behind me looked familiar. It was me. Same red pack, same hiking clothes, but her face was haggard, thin, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she'd been hiking for months instead of weeks. "You're new," she said, not seeming surprised at all. "First time through?" "Through what?" "The layers. I've been trying to find my original timeline for 3 weeks now. Every time I climb through the fog, I slide forward. Can't seem to get back to July 14th. This is insane." "Gets worse. Every time you go through, another version gets created. We're all hiking different temporal versions of the same trail, all trying to find you, or way back to when we belong." She was right. Over the next few hours, or days, or years, I honestly couldn't tell anymore. I kept climbing the tower whenever fog rolled in. Each time I emerged into a different when. July 20th, 2025, August 3rd, 2024, September 15th, 2026. And each time, I met more versions of myself. Some were older, some younger. The version from 2027 looked like she was aging backwards, getting younger every time I saw her. The one from 2023 was aging rapidly, trying to catch up to where she was supposed to be. All of us hiking the same trail, but in different years, all lost. The Appalachian Trail was fragmenting into infinite temporal paths. Each white blaze led to a different when instead of where. We were all trying to hike at the same pace, desperately attempting to merge back into one timeline, one life, one version of Emma who could go back to Boston and tend bar and pretend none of this ever happened. But when 2 versions touched, when I accidentally bumped into my July 20th self near the shelter, both of us experienced all our memories simultaneously. Every timeline, every version, every choice we'd made or were going to make. It was overwhelming, paralyzing. We both collapsed, clutching our heads until we crawled away from each other. The worst part is watching all the other versions converge at Clingman's Dome. Dozens of me at different ages from different years, all hiking toward that tower in the fog, some carrying gear I don't recognize yet, others using equipment that looks ancient, all of us searching for the same thing, the way back to our original timeline. I've stopped counting the days, or years, or whatever they are now. I climb the tower every time the fog rolls in, still looking for July 14th, 2024, still trying to find my way back to the day this all started. But there are hundreds of me now, all lost in our own tomorrow. Though yes, all hiking an endless trail through time. Looking back, though I'm not sure what back means anymore, I think I understand what happened. Clingman's Dome sits at a place where time gets thin, especially in the fog. The observation tower punches through it like a needle through fabric, and we're all just threads that got tangled up. I still hike, still carry my pack, still follow the blazes, still check the trail registers, hoping to find an entry that makes sense. Sometimes I meet hikers who aren't me, people from timelines I haven't visited yet. They always ask the same question: when are you trying to get back to? The answer's always July 14th, 2024. The day I was supposed to reach Clingman's Dome for the first time, enjoy the view, and keep hiking south toward Springer Mountain like any normal through hiker. Instead, I'm still up here, still climbing, still searching for the right today in a fog that never fully clears. I'm 28 and work as a maintenance tech for a hospital down in Knoxville. Been doing that job for about 3 years now, but back in 2019 I was getting burned out pretty bad. My girlfriend had just broken up with me. Work was stressing me out, and I felt like I was losing my mind being cooped up in the city all the time. So I decided to do something I'd been putting off since college: hike the Appalachian Trail. Not the whole thing, mind you, just a section through Tennessee and North Carolina. I figured a couple weeks in the mountains would clear my head. I started my hike at Damascus, Virginia, planning to go south to the Smokies. Solo hiking, which I know sounds crazy now, but at the time I thought I needed the solitude. I'd been on the trail for about a week when I hit what hikers call trail depression. That point where the novelty wears off and you're just tired, sore, and wondering why you thought sleeping on the ground every night was a good idea. By day 8, I was desperate for some human contact. That's when I reached Overmountain Shelter. It's this massive red barn that they converted into a shelter back in the day. Holds about 20 people and sits in this beautiful grassy meadow with mountain views all around. When I got there around 4 p.m., I could see smoke coming from inside and heard voices. After a week of talking to nobody but myself, I was so relieved I almost jogged the last 100 yards. Inside, I found a group of 6 hikers who called themselves the Ridge Runners. They were all wearing matching red bandanas and had that easy, confident look that comes from being on the trail for months. They introduced themselves, said they'd been hiking together since Springer Mountain in Georgia, which meant they'd covered over 400 miles as a group. The unofficial leader seemed to be this older guy named Jack, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair and all lines around his eyes. There was also Sarah, a woman about my age with blonde hair tied back, and 4 others whose names I honestly can't remember clearly now. They welcomed me like I was family, shared their dinner with me, some kind of pasta dish they'd made over their camp stove, and told stories about their hike. They'd been through some rough weather, helped each other through injuries, the whole 9 yards. Sarah mentioned she was a nurse from Atlanta, which made me feel even more comfortable. These seemed like good people, experienced hikers who knew what they were doing. But looking back now, I should have paid attention to the first weird thing that happened that evening. Around 7 p.m., Jack stood up and said, "Time for a bathroom break." All 6 of them stood up at exactly the same moment. Not like someone announced it and they decided to go. They all just rose in perfect unison, like they'd rehearsed it. Then they walked out of the shelter in a single file line, each person matching the stride length of the person in front of them. Same pace, same arm swing, same everything. I figured it was just some trail family quirk. People develop weird habits when they've been hiking together for months, but when they came back 5 minutes later, they were still walking in that perfect line. still matching each other's movements exactly. During dinner, I noticed something else odd. They all ate with the same rhythm, lifting their forks at the same time, chewing with the exact same motion, swallowing together. It was like watching synchronized swimming, but with eating. When I tried to start a conversation, they'd all turn to look at me simultaneously, their heads moving at the same speed and stopping at the same angle. "You hiking alone?" Jack asked, and the others nodded along with his words like they all agreed with the question before he'd even finished to sking it. "Yeah," I said. "Just needed some time to think, you know?" They all smiled at exactly the same moment. The exact same smile, same lip curve, same eye crinkle, everything. When it came time to sleep, they arranged their sleeping bags in a perfect hexagon in the center of the shelter, with their feet pointing toward the middle and their heads facing outward like spokes on a wheel. They lay down at the same time, pulled their sleeping bags up to their chins with identical motions, and went quiet. I set up my sleeping bag near the wall, figuring I'd give them space for whatever ritual they had going. Trail families develop their own ways of doing things, and I didn't want to mess up their system. I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. The moon was bright enough that I could see pretty clearly inside the shelter without using my headlamp. That's when I saw all 6 of them sitting up in their sleeping bags, perfectly still, staring directly at me. Their eyes were open, and they weren't blinking. Just 6 pairs of eyes focused on me like I was the most interesting thing they'd ever seen. "You guys okay?" I whispered. They didn't respond, didn't move, just kept staring. I got up as quietly as I could and went outside to pee, and when I came back, they were all lying down again like nothing had happened. But I had trouble getting back to sleep after that. When the sun came up and hit their faces through the shelter windows, I could see their skin more clearly. Something was wrong with it. It looked too smooth, too perfect, like plastic that's been polished. I couldn't see any pores, any natural texture. Sarah, who I'd thought was pretty the night before, looked like a mannequin in daylight. But the really unsettling part was when I started looking at their faces more carefully. Despite the fact that they appeared to be different ages and genders, they all had the exact same facial features. Same nose shape, same eye spacing, same jawline. It was like someone had taken one face and stretched it different ways, making it older here, more feminine but the underlying structure was identical. They got up and started packing their gear, and I watched them move. Every motion was perfectly synchronized. When Jack reached for his water bottle, the other 5 reached for theirs at exactly the same time. When Sarah folded her sleeping bag, they all folded theirs with identical movements. It wasn't human coordination. It was too precise, too mechanical. I packed up as fast as I could and hit the trail, hoping to put some distance between us. But about a mile down the path, I looked back and saw them following me. They were maintaining exactly 100 feet of distance, walking in their single-file line, matching my pace perfectly. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. I tried stopping and waving them past, but they just stopped too and waited. When I called out to them, they responded in unison. All 6 voices creating this strange harmony that didn't sound quite right. Like they were trying to sound human but getting the frequencies wrong. Over the next few days, I ran into other northbound hikers who warned me about them. A guy named Pete said they'd been following him for 2 days before switching to someone else. A woman named Lisa said she'd seen them copying the mannerisms of different hikers, walking like them, talking like them, even eating the same foods. That's when I started noticing they were copying me. My hiking gait, the way I adjusted my pack straps, even the way I held my trekking poles. Each day, they looked a little more like me and moved a little more like me. On the 4th day, I made a disturbing discovery. I was looking through my pack for something when I realized my wallet was missing. Later that day, when they were setting up camp about 100 feet from me, like always, I saw Jack pull out what looked like my driver's license. Sarah was holding what appeared to be my credit cards. Another one was scrolling through photos on a phone that looked exactly like mine. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay in my sleeping bag thinking about what they might be, doing with my personal information, my identity. Were they learning to be me? Was this some kind of elaborate identity theft ring that targeted solo hikers? But it felt like more than that. The way they moved, the way they looked at me. The perfect synchronization. It wasn't human behavior. It was like they were studying human behavior from the outside, trying to figure out how to replicate it. I'm at mile 400 on the trail now, and they're still exactly 100 feet behind me. Every day they look a little more like me, and I swear I'm starting to look like them. My reflection in streams looks wrong somehow. Too smooth, too perfect. I've been trying to get to Damascus or any town where there are other people, but every time I think I'm close, the trail seems to stretch longer. The worst part is, I'm not even sure if I'm me anymore. Sometimes I catch myself walking in step with them, thinking the same thoughts at the same time. Last night I realized I was sitting up at 2 a.m., staring at nothing, just like they always do. If you're planning to hike the AT, or any trail really, and you meet a group that moves too perfectly together, that mirrors each other like they're all controlled by the same mind, don't engage with them. Don't let them share your campsite, don't tell them your name, and definitely don't let them follow you. They're not looking for trail friends or hiking partners. They're shopping for new identities, and once they pick you, I don't think you ever really get away. I was 28 when I took that job with the Forestry Service up in West Virginia. I'd been working dead-end retail jobs in Charleston for years, and when my buddy Marcus told me they were hiring seasonal workers to do trail maintenance and fire prevention surveys, it seemed like exactly what I needed. Good pay, fresh air, and I'd always been comfortable in the woods. The job was pretty straightforward. Hike designated trails, check for fallen trees or erosion damage, mark any fire hazards, and report back. Most of the time I worked alone, which suited me fine. I've never been much of a talker, and there's something peaceful about walking through the mountains with just your thoughts and the sound of your boots on the trail. The area I got assigned was up near Monongahela National Forest, some of the most beautiful country you'll ever see. Rolling hills covered in oak and maple, clear streams cutting through valleys, and trails that looked like they'd been there since the Cherokee walked them. My supervisor, an older guy named Bill who'd been doing this work for 30 years, gave me a basic orientation and a GPS unit that looked like it was from the early 2000s. Most of these trails are well marked, he told me, loading supplies into my truck. But some of the older ones, especially up on Ridge Mountain, can get a little confusing. Just stick to your GPS and you'll be fine. And hey, if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut and head back. The woods can play tricks on you sometimes. I figured he was just being cautious. I'd been hiking and camping since I was a kid, and I'd never had any problems navigating backcountry. The first few weeks went exactly like I expected. Long days walking through gorgeous scenery, taking notes, snapping photos of potential hazards with my camera. The work was physically demanding but satisfying, and I was sleeping better than I had in years. It was early October when I got assigned to survey the trails on the north face of Ridge Mountain. I'd never been up there before, but on the map it looked straightforward enough. 3 main trails forming a rough triangle with several smaller connector paths. Bill mentioned that this area didn't get much foot traffic since it was pretty remote, and the trails weren't maintained as regularly as the more popular hiking spots. What he didn't tell me, what I found out later from old forestry records, was why that area didn't get much traffic. Ridge Mountain used to be home to a small community called Mill Haven, settled in the 1890s by families who came to work the timber. The town lasted about 40 years before it was abandoned in the 1930s. Not because the timber ran out, though. The official records just say unsuitable conditions. But I've seen some of the old letters from that time. People talked about sleepless nights, about feeling watched, about their children disappearing for hours and coming back with no memory of where they'd been. The state bought the land in the 1940s, and for decades they tried to turn it into a proper recreation area. They'd send work crews up to clear trails and build facilities, but the projects never lasted. Equipment would malfunction, workers would quit without explanation, and more than a few people got lost on what should have been simple day hikes. By the 1970s, they'd given up on developing that section entirely. But none of this was in the information Bill gave me. All I knew was that it was a routine survey job. I remember that morning clearly because the weather was perfect. Crisp air, bright sunshine, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I parked my truck at the trailhead around 7 a.m., loaded my backpack with water, lunch, my camera, and the GPS unit, and headed up the main trail that would take me to the first survey point. For the first couple of hours, everything went exactly according to plan. The trail was in decent shape, just some minor erosion near a creek crossing, and a few branches. That needed clearing. I marked the GPS coordinates for each issue, took photos, and made notes in my logbook. The forest was alive with birds and squirrels, and I could hear water running somewhere off to my left. Around 10 a.m., I reached what should have been the junction where the main trail connected with the first loop trail. According to my map and GPS, there should have been a clear path heading east that would take me on a 2-mile circuit before bringing me back to this same spot. But when I got there, I couldn't find the trail junction. I spent about 10 minutes walking back and forth looking for any sign of a path heading east. There were a few deer trails, but nothing that looked like it had ever been maintained or marked for human use. I checked my GPS coordinates. I was definitely in the right spot. But the trail that was supposed to be there simply wasn't. That's when I first noticed how quiet it had gotten. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. The birds had stopped singing, and I couldn't hear any of the small sounds you usually get in the forest. No rustling leaves, no insects, no wind through the trees. Just absolute silence that felt thick and heavy in my ears. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the trail had grown over, or maybe there'd been a landslide that wiped it out. These things happen. I decided to follow what looked like the most likely path, a narrow track that headed roughly in the right direction. My GPS showed I was still on course, so I figured I'd just have to do some bushwhacking. But the farther I went, the stranger things got. The trees seemed wrong somehow. Too uniform, like they'd all been planted at the same time. And they were massive, bigger than any trees I'd seen in that area before. Ancient oaks and maples that must have been hundreds of years old. Their branches so thick they blocked out most of the sunlight, even though it was barely past 10 in the morning. The air started feeling heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, but when I looked up through the canopy, the sky was still clear. I was breathing harder than I should have been for the level of exertion, and my shirt was sticking to my back despite the cool temperature. Something was definitely off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I checked my GPS again, and that's when I got my first real chill. According to the device, I was still following the trail and making good progress toward my destination. But when I looked around, there was no trail. I was standing in thick forest with no clear path in any direction. The GPS showed a dotted line representing the trail passing right through where I stood, but I couldn't see anything that looked like a maintained trail. I turned around to head back the way I came, but I couldn't find my own tracks. The forest floor was covered in thick moss that should have shown footprints clearly, but it looked completely undisturbed. Like no one had ever walked through there before. Like I'd just materialized in that spot. That's when I heard the first sound. A low creaking noise, like old wood under stress. I looked up, thinking maybe a tree was about to fall, but all the branches were perfectly still. No wind, no movement. But that creaking sound continued, coming from somewhere ahead of me. Slow and rhythmic, like a metronome keeping time for some invisible orchestra. I decided right then that I was done for the day. Whatever was going on with the GPS or the trails, it could wait. I needed to get back to familiar ground and figure out what was happening. But when I turned to retrace my steps, I realized I had no idea which direction I'd come from. Every direction looked exactly the same. Massive trees, thick moss, and that oppressive quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. The creaking jiditabri louder, and now it sounded like it was coming from multiple directions. Not random creaking, but rhythmic, synchronized, like a dozen grandfather clocks all ticking slightly out of time, with each other. I pulled out my cell phone to call for help, but I had no signal. Not unusual in these mountains, but it still made my chest tight with panic. I picked what I thought was the right direction and started walking, trying to stay calm and think logically. The GPS still showed I was on the trail, still moving toward my waypoint, but my surroundings looked nothing like any trail I'd ever seen. The moss was so thick it was almost spongy under my feet, and in some places it seemed to glow with a faint greenish phosphorescence that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. That's when I saw the first structure. It was just a glimpse at first, something geometric that didn't belong among the organic curves of the trees. As I got closer, I could see it was an old wooden chair sitting by itself in a small depression between two massive oak trees. It looked handmade, with a high back and worn armrests, like something you'd find on a farmhouse porch. The wood was dark with age and weather, but it wasn't rotting. It looked solid, well-maintained, cared for. The chair was rocking, back and forth, slow and steady, like someone was sitting in it enjoying a quiet morning. But there was no one there, and no wind to move it. I stood there staring at it for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The creaking sound was definitely coming from the chair, and now I could hear it wasn't just creaking. There was a subtle sound underneath it, like fabric rustling, like someone shifting their weight in the seat. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off it. That's when I noticed there were more chairs scattered throughout the trees, not dozens, hundreds. They were everywhere once I started looking for them, arranged in rough clusters like outdoor congregations or family gatherings. Some looked like they'd been there for decades, with moss growing in the joint. Tias and bark starting to cover the legs where they'd been still too long. Others looked almost new, their wood still bright and their joints tight, but they were all rocking. All of them, in that same slow, patient rhythm. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my camera to document this, thinking maybe if I had photos, someone could explain what was going on. But when I looked through the viewfinder, all I could see was normal forest. No chairs, no depression, just trees and moss and filtered sunlight. I lowered the camera, and the chairs were still there, still rocking. Raised it again, and they vanished completely from the viewfinder's frame. I tried taking a photo anyway, thinking maybe the camera would capture something my eyes couldn't see when I looked at the screen. But when I checked the image, it just showed empty forest. I took a dozen photos from different angles, and every single one came out normal. Just trees and moss and shadows. But I could still hear them. The creaking was getting louder, more complex, like an orchestra tuning up. And underneath that sound, I started to hear something else. Voices. Quiet at first, just murmurs and whispers, but gradually getting clearer. People talking in low conversational tones, like families chatting on their front porches in the evening. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm was unmistakably human. Questions and answers, statements and responses, the comfortable back and forth of people who knew each other well. Sometimes someone would laugh, a sound so normal and pleasant that for a moment I forgot to be afraid. But then I'd remember that there was no one there, and the pleasant sounds became the most terrifying thing I'd ever heard. I started walking faster, trying to get away from the chairs and their phantom occupants. But the farther I went, the more chairs I found. They were arranged in patterns now. With circles and rows, like they'd been set up for some kind of gathering. Some faced each other in intimate pairs. Others were arranged in large circles, like for a town meeting or church service. And they were all occupied. I couldn't see the occupants, but I could sense them. The way the chairs moved wasn't random. They rocked with the weight and rhythm of actual people. Some rocked fast and light, like children swinging their legs. Others moved slow and heavy, like old folks settling in for a long sit. I could hear the whisper of fabric against wood, the soft sounds of people adjusting their position, clearing their throats, breathing. When I stopped walking, some of the conversations would pause, like the speakers were turning to look at me. The silence would stretch for several heartbeats, and I had the overwhelming sensation of being studied, evaluated, discussed in whispers too quiet for me to hear. Then the conversations would resume, and I would run. I crashed through the forest, branches catching my clothes and backpack, not caring about direction or stealth. I just needed to get away from those voices, from the sensation of invisible eyes tracking my movement. My GPS was bouncing around wildly now, showing my location jumping all over the map in ways that defied physics. One second I'd be half a mile north of my starting point, the next I'd be 3 miles south, then back where I began. But no matter how far or fast I ran, I kept finding more chairs. They were getting newer as I went, like I was moving forward through time instead of space. The moss-covered antiques gave way to chairs that looked like they could have come from any rural home in the last few decades. Kitchen chairs with vinyl seats, recliners with faded floral patterns, folding chairs with aluminum frames. Some still had tags on them, like they'd just been bought and arranged. The voices were getting stronger too. I could start to make out fragments of conversation. Never did find her after she wandered off. Road used to run right through here before they told him not to go up there alone, but he wouldn't listen. Just disappeared one day, left everything behind. And then, clear as day, a woman's voice calling my name. "David! David, come sit with us!" I stopped dead. Nobody knew I was up here. I hadn't told anyone my specific route or schedule. But the voice was warm and welcoming, like a grandmother calling me in for dinner. Other voices joined in. "David, we've been waiting for you." "There's a seat right here, David. Come rest. You look tired." They knew my name. Somehow, these invisible people in their phantom chairs knew exactly who I was. The voices were coming from all around me now, dozens of them, all calling my name with genuine affection and concern. Some sounded like children, others like adults, a few like elderly people. But they all knew me, spoke to me like I was family. I started running again, but my legs felt heavy and weak. The air was getting thicker, harder to breathe, like I was underwater. The voices followed me, always just at the edge of hearing, always calling my name with that horrible warmth and familiarity. That's when I found the newest chair. It was sitting in a small clearing, surrounded by a perfect circle of older chairs like they were all facing it. Unlike the others, this one wasn't rocking. It sat perfectly still, waiting. It was a simple wooden chair, handmade but recently built. The wood was fresh and light-colored, still smelling of sawdust and varnish. There was a small metal plaque screwed into the back of the chair. When I got close enough to read it, my blood turned to ice. David Mitchell, Forest Service, 2023. My name, my job, this year. The other voices had gone quiet, but I could feel their attention focused on me like a physical weight. Waiting, expecting. The empty chair sat there in perfect silence, and I understood with horrible clarity that it had been made for me. That all of this, the missing trail, the GPS malfunction, the phantom conversations, had been designed to bring me to this moment, to this chair. I could feel myself taking a step toward it. It looked comfortable, well made. I was tired from all the running and confusion, and it would feel so good to just sit down and rest for a moment, to join the conversation, to become part of whatever community had gathered in this impossible place. Another step forward. The chair seemed to be calling to me without words, promising rest and belonging, and an end to the fear and confusion. I could almost feel the smooth wood under my hands, the relief of settling into the seat and finally, being still. My foot was already lifting for the third step when my phone buzzed. The sound was so unexpected, so jarringly normal, that it broke whatever spell had been settling over me. I looked down at the screen. Somehow I had signal again, and there was a text message from Marcus asking how the new job was going. The mundane reality of that text, the casual check-in from a friend, the reminder that there was a real world outside this nightmare, snapped me back to myself. I turned away from the chair and ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. This time, I didn't stop when I found more chairs. I ran past entire neighborhoods of them, through conversations that called my name with increasing desperation and anger. The voices were no longer warm and welcoming. They were demanding, insistent, furious that I was refusing their invitation. "David, you can't leave. David, come back. You belong here with us. David! David!" I ran until my lungs burned and my vision blurred, until I thought my heart would burst. And then, suddenly, I was standing on a real trail, narrow but clearly maintained, with actual blazes on the trees. According to my GPS, I was somehow back at the original trail junction where I'd started looking for the loop trail hours earlier. I didn't question it. I didn't even pause to catch my breath. I turned and walked as fast as my shackies. 9 legs would carry me back toward the trailhead where I'd left my truck. The forest gradually came back to life around me. Birds started singing again. I could hear the wind in the leaves, and that oppressive weight lifted from my chest. By the time I reached my truck, it felt like waking up from the worst dream of my life. But when I got back to the ranger station, things got complicated. I tried to explain what had happened to Bill, showed him the GPS readings, told him about the missing trail and the chairs. He listened without interrupting, then pulled out a different map than the one he'd given me originally. "Son," he said, "there never was a loop trail on the north face of Ridge Mountain. That section's been closed to the public since the 1970s. I don't know where you got that map, but the trail you were looking for doesn't exist." I insisted that he'd given me the map himself, but when he showed me his files, there was no record of assigning me to Ridge Mountain. According to his logs, I was supposed to be working a completely different section that day, a popular hiking area about 10 miles south. He seemed genuinely confused about the whole thing, like he'd never sent me up there at all. But I still had the map. I pulled it out of my backpack and showed it to him, and his face went white. He stared at it for a long time, then walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I'd never seen before. "This is a copy of the original development plans from 1962, he said, laying an old blueprint next to my map. "These are the trails they wanted to build up there before the project got canceled." They were identical. My map showed trails that had never been built, based on plans that had been abandoned 60 years ago. Bill had no idea how I'd gotten a copy of something that should have been buried in state archives. "David," he said, and his voice was wet and serious, "I think you should take a few days off, and I think you should stay away from Ridge Mountain." I tried to go back to work the next week, but I couldn't focus. Every trail I walked felt wrong somehow, like I was being watched. I'd catch myself listening for the sound of creaking wood, scanning the trees for shapes that didn't belong. My camera stopped working properly. It would take perfectly normal photos most of the time, but occasionally it would capture empty chairs sitting in places where I was sure I hadn't seen them. The dream started about a month later. Every night, I'd find myself walking through that impossible forest again, following trails that led nowhere, listening to voices calling my name. But in the dreams, I always ended up back in that clearing with the chair that had my name on it, and each time, it got harder to walk away. I quit the forestry service before Christmas. Told Bill I was going back to school, but really, I just couldn't handle being in the woods anymore. I moved back to Charleston, got a job in IT, and tried to pretend none of it had ever happened. But the dreams never stopped. And sometimes, when I'm driving through the mountains on my way to visit family, I'll catch myself looking for a particular trailhead, looking for a path that leads up to Ridge Mountain, to a place where invisible people sit in waiting chairs and call my name with voices full of love and longing. The worst part is that sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I miss them. I miss the sound of their conversations, the warmth in their voices when they called to me. I remember how comfortable that chair looked, how peaceful it would have been to finally sit down and rest. I know that if I ever go back, I won't have the strength to leave again. And the really terrifying thing is that I'm not sure I want to. Because whatever those voices were, whatever was waiting in those chairs, they knew me, they welcomed me, they had a place prepared just for me, a community where I would belong forever. I'm 31 now, 3 years older and suppy, ocidly wiser. I work a good job, I have friends, I date occasionally, but I've never felt as wanted, as perfectly understood, as I did in that moment when those phantom voices called my name. And sometimes, when I'm sitting in my apartment on quiet Sunday mornings, I swear I can hear it. The distant sound of wooden chairs creaking in a rhythm like a heartbeat, patient and eternal, waiting for me to come home.